today, we see Jesus appealing directly to the listener to assure them, to assure us, that the kingdom of heaven, in the kingdom of heaven, each of us can be considered great when we follow the basic tenets that he's preaching. That God finds an essential interest in the poor and the meek and the righteous. It is when we disregard and not take seriously these teachings, when we do not speak of these teachings regularly, that we will find ourselves taken lightly in the kingdom of heaven. This is so now, and it has always been, the teaching in spiritual matters. We cannot learn spiritual principles and then think that we either have no use for these lessons or that we have learned about everything about them and then go on about our lives, not considering them ever again. It only stands to reason that this is true. Take, for example, a medical doctor. The doctor trains and learns a great deal. But can a medical doctor not receive regular retraining and provide adequate care for her or his patients? No. Regular learning and regular refreshing and dialogue has to occur to stay abreast and to be vital. Spiritual principles must also be spoken and taught and shared and learned over and again. A commentator named John Brokoff suggests this. Is there a person who does not use salt and light every single day? Is there a person who does not know from experience that what salt and light are? In these parables that Jesus is dealing with, two universal and indispensable elements of life are described. Consider first the importance of salt in our lives. Like seawater, our bodies contain salt. A tear, a drop of blood, a bead of sweat. Without salt, our hearts would not beat, would not flow. Our blood would not flow. Our muscles would not work properly. Before birth, a baby develops in a saline solution. Accident victims receive a salt solution intravenously. And in Roman times, salt was so precious that it was used, at least in part, as part of their pay. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, a word for salt. A person is not worth his or her salt is not one worthy of their wages. And every year, Americans use 85 million tons of salt for food and chemical industries. You are the salt of the earth. Today's is an evangelistic parable. It's to advise each of us, every single one of us, that we are important in God's message to the world. Though numerous and plentiful as salt we are, each of us remains valuable as long as we retain our saltiness. And by golly, you have plenty of saltiness out there. We retain our flavor. We retain our willingness to share about our relationship with God. Now, I believe churches grow when members speak openly to others about their relationships with God and with one another. But in a strange way, I also believe that churches grow for the opposite reason. Sometimes people don't talk about their relationship with God, and a church will grow because people find it and they go, oh, I don't have to talk about this. I'm sticking around here. It's a strange thing. Not speaking of God amongst one another takes a church away from the power of God and into regular, humanly inspired realms, where, of course, miracles do not exist. They cease. Where reality can be manipulated by human concerns over that which is eternal. Humans are almost always concerned with short-term personal gains rather than actions and efforts that are beneficial to the individual and neighbor. Instigation of war is one of the perfect examples of this idea, where immediate results are promised, but long-term effects are shoved aside. We need to be regularly speaking to one another about our image of God. We need to turn to the gospel scriptures, which are time-tested attempts to qualify and to quantify the works of God and God's direction upon each and every one of us. Now, we can do this through Bible study, or we can achieve this God talk by starting all of our meetings with prayer and a short time of praying or sharing about our God talk. When we meet one another at the store, we can drop an encouraging comment about the lesson we spoke about in worship on the prior Sunday instead of jumping right into the gossip, right? Isn't that what you do in line at the store? Right? You are the light of the world is also spoken. Mr. Brokaw further suggests, he says, consider too the importance of light. We never seem to get enough light to rid ourselves in our lives of darkness. When Goethe was on his deathbed, it is reported that his last request was more light. And when the shades were pulled aside, he was not satisfied. He repeated, more light. It is said that Ernie Pyle, the World War II correspondent, wrote to a friend, if you have any light, shine it in my direction. God knows that I have run out of light. Light symbolizes a life of quality and service. When Robert Louis Stevenson was a boy, he watched a lamplighter igniting the lamps as he went down a street. Stevenson said, I'm watching a man put holes in the darkness. Isn't that great?
Sure is.
John Ruskin, another observer, watched a lamplighter light lamps, and he said, now that is what I mean by being a Christian. You ought to be able to see where that Christian has been by the lights that they leave burning behind them. Another great quote. My friends, we, each and every one of us, are considered by the kingdom of heaven. We are each an important part of in growing the church and in growing individually. Now, how will we be considered by the kingdom of heaven? Will we be considered great or least? Of course, some of us will allow ourselves to be caught up in an esoteric discussion as to whether or not that kingdom exists in the first place. When we do that, we become human beings having spiritual moments. It is when we take the opposite, when we become spiritual beings having human moments, that we can make a difference. You see that difference there? We're not just human beings having spiritual moments. We are spiritual beings having human moments. I would prefer the second of the two. It's when we take that attitude, our lives can change. Engaging in discussions and sharing of spiritual principles is a growth opportunity, and it's a world-changing opportunity. It's for each of us. And it's also a way to attract others into our midst, those who are seeking meaning in their life. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. I hope that you can believe that you are an important part of God's realm and of the church's realm. So friends, I do pray that you become the lamplighter. May you punch a few holes in the darkness with your light. And wherever you go, may people know who you are because of the light you leave behind. Would you stand with me now if you're able, and let us sing, Lead on, Eternal Son.